this past weekend, this past Labor Day weekend, like many before it, marked the traditional kickoff of the midterms general campaign season. Both President Biden and former President Trump are campaigning in battleground states, including in Ohio and in Pennsylvania, states we'll be talking about a lot, I'm sure, on Thursday at a Democratic National Committee meeting in Maryland. President Biden made his pitch for electing more Democrats.
Imagine if we just elected 2 more Democrats to the Senate and keep the House of Representatives. Imagine. We'll codify Roe v. Wade. We'll ban assault weapons. We'll protect Social Security and Medicare. We'll protect voting rights. We'll pass election reform.
Meanwhile, Republicans have been accusing President Biden of wasting money and hurting the economy. Here's Senate Minority Whip John Thune taking aim at the president's student loan forgiveness program.
The Democrats demonstrated once again they don't care about fiscal responsibility. They don't care about debt or deficit reduction. Right now, they care about one thing, and that is buying votes going into a November election.
Joining the conversation now is NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns. She's been running all across the country. So let's discuss the races to watch ahead of November's election. So Dasha, like I said, you've been crisscrossing the country, going to battleground states, including Pennsylvania. Talk a bit about what your reporting has shown about what's at stake in this midterm election, what voters are talking about, and how Pennsylvania in particular is sort of a microcosm of what's going on out there.
Yeah, Yamish, I've been spending a whole lot of time in Pennsylvania. So have you. And we're about to spend a lot more time there. I think just about all of our lives are going to become more absorbed with this state and the races that we see there, not just because it's probably the Democrats' best shot at picking up a Senate seat, something President Biden was pointing to in his soundbite you played there, but also because it really is pretty representative of politics in the age of Trump. Look, you've got Dr. Oz, a celebrity candidate who nobody really ever thought would be running in a race like this. People still, voters that I talk to this day, are a little bit confused to see a celebrity doctor, a reality TV star running for Senate, but he is, and he's received Trump's endorsement. On the other side, you have his opponent, Democratic candidate John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, who himself is a bit of a larger than life character, right? This 6'8" guy with lots of tattoos who's painted himself very much as an outsider. And I'll tell you, Yamish, the language that I hear voters use when they talk about Fetterman is pretty similar to the language I heard voters use when they talked about Trump in 2016 and in 2020, saying, this guy's not a typical politician. He tells it like it is. So you've got these two battling it out. Oz has recently really been focusing on Fetterman, attacking him as soft on crime, not willing to debate. Meanwhile, Fetterman, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, I'm sure, has started to put abortion as an issue that's front and center. On Sunday, he's going to hold an abortion rights rally in Pennsylvania. So you've got
sort of the talk about there. A lot of sort of
absolutely
fighting it out. And Amy, when you think about this, I want to put up this poll from NPR, PBS NewsHour, and Marist, and it shows that it's in a generic ballot, 48% of registered voters are saying they prefer a Democratic candidate, and 44% are saying they prefer a Republican. Of course, we have you on here. We're so excited to get you on the program because you can break down what's at stake here. What are the big trends that we're seeing when you think about that poll?
So we have seen some movement in the so-called generic ballot, right, where you ask voters that question: who would you vote for in November, Democrats or Republicans? Now, Republicans had been up a couple of points earlier in the year. So it's been, we'll call it a 3, 4, 5-point shift in Democrats' favor. The most fascinating thing, though, Yamish, and it's what has even people who've been doing politics for years and years and years, folks I talk to say this is the strangest election I've ever been through because the president is still really unpopular. Even though his approval rating's not as bad as it was, say, at the end of July when it was at 38%, at 42%, that's not a great place to be when you're the party in power. But underneath it, we're seeing, like you just put that number up, Democrats at 48%, even though the president somewhere is at 41%. So Democrats somehow outperforming the president, that's not something that you typically see. And the real question, again, another head scratcher is, what role is abortion going to play in this?
I want to ask about abortion. I want to ask you a quick follow-up, which is New Hampshire. Why is that interesting to you? What stands out there?
So this is sort of the last chance here for Republicans. Earlier this year, they thought they were going to be able to put 4, 5, Senate seats in play because the environment looked good and the incumbent senator there, it's her first reelection campaign, doesn't have as strong of numbers in that state. But they have a primary on Tuesday between, surprise, surprise, a Trumpian type of candidate and a more establishment candidate. Right now, the more Trumpian candidate is ahead. It's going to be very hard for that candidate to survive. This is another place where had Trump not been engaged, he hasn't endorsed here, but he was really responsible for making it really hard for the most popular Republican in that state, the governor, to say yes to a Senate run. So we'll look back, if Democrats do hold on to the Senate, we'll look back to a place
I
like
just lost
New
the
Hampshire and
program.
say what could have been.
I just lost program.
And Nia, I want to come to you. We've seen Biden and Trump fighting it out and going to states like Ohio. What are you sort of hearing when you think about sort of how these two presidents are dueling it out when there are so many issues like abortion, like inflation on voters' minds?
Well, listen, I mean, you obviously hear Biden trying to make this a choice election rather than a referendum election. He gave that big speech, really pointing the finger at Trump and his more ardent followers as a danger to the country, as a danger to democracy. And you have Trump doing what Trump does, going to different states, Pennsylvania, I'm sure he'll be in Georgia, and these other states, Ohio, for instance, where he's got a big following. They are attached to his message about 2020 being a fraudulent election. They are attached to his message about him being a target of a witch hunt from the FBI, from the DOJ, and from everyone and their mother. And so that very much resonates with his voters. I think the problem that Republicans are seeing, and you can sort of see a kind of firing squad already circulating among these Republicans who I talk to, is that some of these Trumpist candidates might be great for primary voters, but not so great for independent voters, not so great for suburban white women voters who, of course, are reacting to a lot of the news we're seeing, particularly around the Dobbs decision. You see something really happening in the data. Inflation is certainly a huge issue. I think it's the number one issue among voters. The second most important issue, abortion. The third is healthcare.
Well, when you bring up abortion, I want to talk about sort of it's such importance that it has. Dasha, you've been out there talking to candidates, especially Republicans who have had to sort of shift their messaging, I think, in Washington State. Tell us a little bit about what you're hearing on the campaign trail.
Well, look, I've had the privilege of being on the ground in several states that were sort of bellwethers that gave us that signal that abortion was really going to become a big driving issue for voters. I was on the ground in Kansas in the month leading up to that big decision where voters voted down the anti-abortion amendment. And what's really interesting, Amish, when I've been talking to voters, when I was talking to them in 2020 and over the last couple of years, there was a lot of focus on politics of personality, right? Is this a candidate that I like? Is this somebody I want to get a beer with? Is this somebody I trust? Is this somebody that's authentic? That's really how Donald Trump, won over a lot of voters. Recently, especially since Dobbs, it's been much more a politics of policy, where for the first time in a while, I'm hearing voters really bring up these issues like abortion and like inflation that are actually impacting them, that they feel that direct connection that whoever I elect, who I vote for, is going to impact my life. And it's true, running as a Republican in the post-Dobbs era is a bit of a challenge. I heard that in Washington State when I was there last week. I interviewed Senate candidate Tiffany Smiley, who has made it very clear, she's tried to make it clear that she is pro-life, but she would not vote for a federal abortion ban. You saw Blake Masters, right? NBC News reporting that he scrubbed his website of anti-abortion language. And when I was reporting on New York's 19th district race, a generic Republican versus a generic Democrat, no offense to them, but it wasn't a personality contest. It was really a contest of issues, Republicans running on inflation, Democrats running on abortion. The Republican in that race also kind of walked back the message and saying, look, I think the Supreme Court upended what I thought was law. So you're seeing the shift in messaging, and you are seeing voters, Amish, very much coming out to the polls based on this issue. So many folks that I've been talking to at polling places, I asked them, what did you vote on? What did you think about when you cast your ballot? And they said, Roe.
And Amy, last 30 seconds here. When we think about sort of race and crime in the conversations, what do you say? Actually, I'm being told 10 seconds.
Oh.
How much is sort of these other cultural issues playing a factor?
It's definitely a factor. And look, we're already starting to see Republicans, they want to change the conversation, talk about crime, talk about inflation, talk about the border. Democrats, you can see ad after ad really focusing in on Roe and abortion and that issue. So it's going to be a fight.
Well, definitely more to talk about. Thank you so much to our panel for joining us and for sharing your reporting. And don't